Look closely at the theater of modern statecraft, and you will notice a terrifying discrepancy between those who stand at the illuminated podiums and those who actually write the script. We are conditioned to believe that national policy is forged in the crucible of democratic debate, hammered out by elected officials accountable to the public eye. Yet, behind the heavy oak doors of ministries and the classified chambers of defense departments, a vastly different reality operates in total, calculated silence. A shadow network of unelected, unaccountable architects has quietly usurped the traditional mechanisms of sovereign power. This is not a conspiracy of clandestine cabals meeting in subterranean bunkers. It is a sanitized, highly lucrative corporate takeover of global governance, executing an agenda that fundamentally redefines the nature of state control. The true architects of our contemporary geopolitical landscape do not wear military uniforms, nor do they hold political office. They carry briefcases, wield proprietary algorithms, and operate under the impenetrable shield of corporate non-disclosure agreements. Global consulting firms have infiltrated the central nervous system of nations worldwide, establishing a stranglehold over the very decisions that dictate the fate of millions. When a government announces a radical economic restructuring, a sweeping defense modernization, or a massive privatization initiative, the blueprint rarely originates from within its own civil service. It is purchased, prepackaged, and implemented by external corporate entities whose loyalties lie fundamentally with their global profit margins, not the citizenry of any single nation. Entities like McKinsey and Company and Boston Consulting Group are no longer mere advisory bodies. They have evolved into an invisible, parallel branch of government. Their operatives sit at the right hand of presidents, prime ministers, and autocrats alike, whispering strategic imperatives that bypass traditional parliamentary scrutiny. This deep infiltration creates a profound dependency, hollowing out the state's internal capacity to think, plan, and govern independently. The sovereign state gradually becomes a hollow vessel, a bureaucratic delivery mechanism executing the strategic vision of a corporate hegemon. This dependency is not a byproduct of modern complexity. It is a calculated, structural capture. By positioning themselves as the ultimate arbiters of efficiency and modernization, these global consulting firms have convinced sovereign nations that they are inherently incapable of managing their own complex affairs. The public sector is systematically defunded, scrutinized, and demoralized, creating a persistent vacuum of expertise that only high-priced consultants can fill. The result is a perpetual cycle of reliance, where the prescribed cure for state inefficiency is always an increased dose of corporate intervention. To understand the mechanics of this covert influence, one must examine the revolving door that seamlessly connects corporate boardrooms to the highest echelons of state power. Personnel flow effortlessly between senior government roles and lucrative partnerships at these firms, blurring the lines between public duty and private enterprise until the distinction vanishes entirely. A defense secretary may award a multi-million-dollar strategy contract to a firm, only to join that very firm's advisory board upon leaving office. This is not merely a conflict of interest. It is the total, unapologetic fusion of the corporate and the sovereign. The weaponization of secrecy is paramount to maintaining this operation. The contracts binding these firms to national governments are shrouded in layers of legal obfuscation. The advice rendered, the data analyzed, and the ultimate architects of a given national policy remain fiercely guarded secrets. Citizens are presented with the devastating consequences of these policies, from sudden austerity measures to deregulated markets and shifting military postures, without ever knowing the true authors of their misfortune. The democratic feedback loop is deliberately severed, replaced by a black box of corporate consultation. Consider the deployment of hybrid warfare in the economic domain, where a nation's infrastructure is systematically dismantled not by foreign missiles, but by optimized spreadsheets. When a global consulting firm is tasked with streamlining a nation's healthcare system or energy grid, the underlying objective is rarely public welfare. The playbook dictates the commodification of public assets, opening lucrative new markets for the firm's vast portfolio of other corporate clients. The state pays exorbitant fees for the privilege of its own systematic plundering, all executed under the sanitized, unassailable guise of structural reform. The echoes of past conflicts still resonate deeply, but the battlefield has fundamentally shifted. Defense strategies, once the exclusive domain of seasoned military commanders and dedicated intelligence agencies, are now heavily shaped by these same corporate entities. Firms advise on weapons procurement, intelligence restructuring, and the modernization of armed forces, inserting a profit-driven variable into the fragile life-or-death calculus of national security. when the same global consulting firms advise rival nations on their respective defense postures. A chilling conflict of interest emerges, transforming the grand game of geopolitical chess into a managed, highly profitable corporate portfolio. This standardization of statecraft has terrifying implications for the fundamental concept of national sovereignty. When governments across different continents, facing vastly different socio-economic realities, implement identical cookie-cutter policy reforms, it is not evidence of a universal truth being discovered. It is the undeniable footprint of a singular, overarching corporate ideology being exported globally. The unique cultural, historical, and economic nuances of a nation are flattened beneath the crushing weight of standardized best practices, designed in boardrooms thousands of miles away from the populations they impact. Historically, empires maintained control through overt military occupation and brutal colonial administration. The modern paradigm requires no such messy aggression. The new architecture of global hegemony is built entirely on intellectual capture. By controlling the language of governance, defining what constitutes economic efficiency, and monopolizing the data upon which critical decisions are made, global consulting firms exert a level of control that historical emperors could only envy. They do not need to conquer a nation, they simply need to be hired to manage its decline. Within the domestic sphere, the human cost of this outsourced governance is profound and deliberately obscured from the public consciousness. Policies drafted by Boston Consulting Group, or its peers, routinely prioritize short-term fiscal metrics over long-term social stability. The resulting austerity programs, the slashing of vital social safety nets, and the privatization of essential services are presented to the public as unavoidable economic realities. In truth, they are calculated ideological choices, engineered by consultants who remain entirely insulated from the societal devastation their recommendations unleash upon the working class. The political class, whether willingly complicit or tragically unwitting, serves essentially as the public relations arm for these corporate directives. Elected leaders absorb the intense political fallout for unpopular policies, acting as a convenient human shield for the consulting firms that actually designed the legislation. If a policy fails catastrophically, the government is blamed, ousted in the next election cycle, and replaced by a new administration that will, inevitably, hire the exact same global consulting firms to fix the resulting mess. It is an airtight, self-perpetuating system of unaccountable power. We are witnessing the terminal decline of the Westphalian system, the historical framework where sovereign states held absolute, unquestioned authority over their internal affairs. Today, the boundaries of the nation-state are highly porous, easily penetrated by corporate influence. Global consulting firms operate as a transnational shadow government, weaving a uniform policy consensus across borders and oceans. They facilitate a quiet, bloodless coup against the very concept of democratic self-determination, transferring the vital levers of power from the ballot box to the boardroom. This shadow network thrives on the carefully cultivated illusion of objective expertise. They leverage a manufactured aura of infallibility, utilizing complex data models and impenetrable academic jargon to intimidate civil servants and silence dissenting voices. The data, however, is never truly neutral. It is selectively curated and interpreted to justify predetermined conclusions that align seamlessly with the broader financial interests of the global corporate elite. The consulting firm is merely the sophisticated delivery mechanism for this ideological payload. In moments of acute national crisis, be it a global pandemic, a sudden financial meltdown, or an unexpected geopolitical shock, this dependency transitions from partial to absolute. Panicked governments, having previously stripped their own institutions of analytical capacity on the advice of these very firms, turn blindly to them for salvation. Emergency contracts are signed rapidly, without oversight, granting unelected consultants sweeping emergency powers to redesign public health responses, allocate billions in stimulus funds, and restructure entire sectors of the economy overnight. Crisis is the ultimate, highly profitable catalyst for their permanent entrenchment. The classified lessons from past emergencies never faded. They were meticulously cataloged and became the operational blueprint for future exploitation. Each crisis serves as a live laboratory for testing new mechanisms of corporate control, further normalizing the presence of these firms at the absolute center of state power. The public is endlessly assured that these are temporary necessary measures required to navigate unprecedented times. Yet the vast infrastructure of influence they build during a crisis is rarely dismantled once the immediate danger has passed. It calcifies, becoming the new, immutable baseline of modern governance. The ultimate triumph of this insidious system is its profound invisibility. The covert influence of global consulting firms on national policy is not hidden in the shadows. It is hidden in plain sight, buried deep within thousands of pages of mundane policy documents, strategic reviews, and budget annexes. It is a quiet usurpation, achieved not through the violent force of arms, but through the irresistible, paralyzing gravity of perceived expertise. We have unwittingly surrendered the destiny of our nations to entities that view citizens merely as abstract data points in a global optimization algorithm. The traditional maps of geopolitical power are dangerously obsolete, rendering our understanding of global events fundamentally flawed. To comprehend the invisible forces shaping our world, one must stop looking at the charismatic figureheads posturing on the international stage and start tracking the silent flow of consultants through the corridors of power. The true sovereignty of a nation is no longer measured by its military might or its gross domestic product, but by its capacity to resist the intellectual capture of this global corporate apparatus. Until we recognize the existence of this hidden architecture, we remain unwitting subjects in a world we no longer control.